Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Vince, and here I try to share with you ideas and books or people that I think you should know about. In this video, I'm going to look at the book Jesus and the Powers by N.T. Wright and Michael Bird. This is not actually a book that I think that it's very important that you know about or you have to know about. I think that they fall kind of short of that, and I'll talk more about that in my conclusion. But hey, I read it. Here it is, if you want to know anything. This video is a little bit more in-depth look at the book, so if you're not interested in that, you just want a quick summary. I also have a shorter video on my channel where I summarize it, or at least try to summarize it, in less than 5 minutes. So I want to make a quick plug here and say that if you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and if you like videos like this in general, make sure you subscribe. If you're not a content creator, you wouldn't believe how much it helps just to show us support by giving us a like or definitely a subscribe. All right, so let's look at the book. Jesus and the Powers, with the subheading, Christian Political Witness in an Age of Totalitarian Terror and Dysfunctional Democracies. Apparently Michael Bird is the one who really likes alliteration, and so that's where we get this subtitle. The book is a book on Christians and politics, or they would say Christians and empire, Christians and power. When we talk about the word power, though, we need to keep in mind that in this day and age, we talk about a division between church and state, so that we might talk about the power of God or the power of demons or the power of Satan. And then we also over here talk about the power of state. So we think about these two realms as being different and being separated. In ancient times, this just wasn't the case. The spiritual realm was intertwined with the physical realm, so that leaders were seen as gods, or if not gods themselves, certainly put in their position by God. So when we talk about Jesus and the powers, we're not talking about Jesus and the power of Rome, or even Jesus and the power of God, but how does Jesus interact with the powers that run the earth? So not just the powers of the state or the powers of the spiritual, but those powers intertwined. Another way to say that is, when Jesus said something like, "Blessed are the poor," or "Go out and clothe the naked," he was saying more than just something dealing with a problem on earth. He was actually speaking to the cosmic powers that are in charge of that. All right, let's dive into the book. It's a fairly short book. I think the best way for you to get into it or to understand what this is to give you my notes on, or at least to go over my notes on the chapters. In chapter 1, Bird and Wright set up the problem by recounting that historically Christians have had to deal with empire throughout Christianity. The Bible is utterly immersed in empire. The Torah deals with oppressive empires. The prophets talk about oppressive empires and how to act if you are an empire, or how to avoid another empire. Jesus is born into the Roman Empire, and in fact, Jesus is born at a time of political unrest. So after Jesus, Christians are looked down upon and sometimes persecuted by the empire, but eventually Christianity becomes the dominant religion within the empire. And so to top this all off, Christians believe that God's kingdom is an empire in itself. So that's why it's important to look for a biblical way to relate to empires. The authors give us two things to remember as we turn our attention to how do we interact with government, and that is, number one, to remember that God is sovereign over history, and so history is going to turn out the way that God wants it to turn out. That's their belief, and that's what they're going. That's kind of the narrative that we're looking at this in. And number two is God's people should engage with and transform empire by promoting justice and peace, just as Jesus promoted justice and peace. So those are the two things to keep at the forefront of our mind as we go through this. So their conversation is going to start in chapter 2, where they more closely look at when Christianity, under the Roman Emperor Constantine, went from being this marginalized religion and sometimes a persecuted religion to being the religion in charge. And so what Bird and Wright say is that had some good and some bad effects. The bad effect, well, that's well known, and that's that Christianity became the oppressors instead of the oppressed. Or another way to say it is that Christianity seemed to trade in the cross of Jesus for the crown of Caesar, or even for the sword of Caesar, to be more accurate. So, for instance, you might think Caesar Augustus was well known for bringing peace, or the Pax Romana, to the Roman Empire, but it was a peace by the sword. It was a peace through fear. It was a peace through violence, like be peaceful or die. Jesus, on the other hand, in the Gospels offers peace through self-giving and sacrifice. But once Christianity became the dominant religion, they often conquered others with the sword, and so they turned into the new Caesar. On the other hand, they want to point out that there's a good thing about Christianity, that as it spread, it brought this concept of love and peace and helping others to the world. And that's a concept that wasn't widely recognized, if accepted at all, in the Roman Empire before. So you might not realize this, but the way, just our way of thinking today of helping others, wasn't really widely recognized before Christ. The dominant view was that the dominant dominated, right? If the strong survived, it was okay to impose yourself on others because that's just the way nature worked. But Christianity spread this idea of helping those who are less fortunate and caring for the poor and the needy. All right, so really the point of this chapter seems to be, how can we get rid of that first part, the part about ruling through violence and anger, and keep that second part, which is the spreading of the concept of love, justice, and peace. Chapter 3, in my opinion, it's the most complex of the chapters, and I think it's fairly obvious that it was written by N.T. Wright. So if you've ever read Wright before, I find that Wright is a wonderful scholar, but he's really a convoluted writer. I feel like he doesn't quite ever get to say the things that he wants to say, or that he has a way of writing where maybe he says it and I just miss it. So maybe this is the best part about this video, is that I'll explain this chapter to you. What he is trying to say is that Christians are definitely supposed to be involved in government. So to anyone who says the contrary, that there should be like a strict separation, he says we're definitely supposed to be involved in government. In fact, God created human beings in Genesis. Whether you think that really happened literally or not, God created human beings to be in control of the earth. God's purpose is for creation to exist in perfect unity, and human beings are put in charge of that. However, what happens, like in Genesis chapter 3, sin enters into the picture. So regardless of if you think that actually happened or not, human beings fell, right? They fell from from what God wanted. And so now sin is this ethereal thing that misleads people, so that their taking care of the earth has now become done through sin, which is manifest in their selfishness and their thirst for power, which is now how people take care of the earth. And it's that corrupt power, that sin, that put Jesus on the cross. But Jesus overcame sin by submitting to it, so taking it upon himself, and then being killed by it and rising again. Now, those who follow Christ are no longer have to be subject to the power of sin, and now they work with God to govern God's creation and bring all creation back into unity with God, as they were supposed to in the first place. The writers often call this our vocation. So humans were originally created to have this vocation of working with God to build the kingdom. And now after Jesus, we do the same thing. We work with God to build the kingdom. Wright in this chapter deals with these passages in the Bible that say God put authorities over you, so you should always follow authorities, like in Romans 13. But to him, he says, what that means is that we're supposed to follow authorities if they are doing the will of God and not governing by sin and selfishness. So in that case, it's okay not to follow the authority, and sometimes even to rebel, as we'll see later. Okay. In chapter 4, they say that the modern world has made things into dichotomies that were not there before. For instance, I've already mentioned this thought that earthly powers are different from spiritual powers, and that there's no dichotomy there in the ancient world. But also, we've made a dichotomy between Jesus' cross and his message about the kingdom. So, for instance, they say more conservative Christians seem to be in favor of the cross, and they make everything about Jesus' death and atonement and forgiveness of sins. And so really that's where you get like the sinner's prayer, and all you have to do is accept Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior. But these people don't let Jesus' view of love and forgiveness penetrate into their view of kingdom. so they're not also getting involved in government and pushing that love that Jesus pushed. More liberal Christians, on the other hand, they seek to make it all about kingdom, and so they are pushing that love and justice for Jesus and trying to create a kingdom on earth as if by themselves. And what Wright and Bird propose is that we start off with cross, right, and then we let that guide us into our view of kingdom, so that we accept the image of cross and atonement and forgiveness. We accept the virtues of Jesus and loving and accepting others, but then we let that guide our whole lives, including our lives in government. We are kingdom people, and we build with God. That's our vocation in our relation with governmental powers. And that's a big term for them also, is building with God. So we're not actually bringing heaven to earth. We're building. And then God is the one who will bring. Chapter 5 examines the complex relationship between Christians and state authorities, addressing when and how Christians should submit to or resist governmental powers. It discusses these biblical teachings and historical examples, highlighting the tensions between obedience to the state laws and fidelity to God's commands. The chapter explores the legitimacy of civil disobedience and violent resistance against tyrannical regimes, emphasizing that obedience to government is conditional on its justice and moral integrity. Ultimately, this chapter argues that nonviolent civil disobedience aimed at upholding civil rights and the common good is generally preferred and more aligned with Christian principles. So again, it is biblical and historical to stand up against or to not follow government authorities if that government is under the auspice of sin and corruption. But if we're going to go against the authority, we still need to pick the most loving way to do that. Chapter 6 lists types of governments that the authors are against, and it tells why. The overarching point is that none of these approaches to government that they're going to explain accept individual liberties and tell the Christian to act out of love and charity. They argue that Christians should reject approaches to government that involve oppressive totalitarian regimes, whether fascist or communist, as well as Christian nationalism and extreme progressive ideologies. Totalitarian regimes like communism or Marxism or fascism seek to impose moral standards, which can be good in that they can be seen as going alongside Christians. And so this is why a lot of times Christians will argue that communism is a Christian ideal, but they do it through violence. So hopefully people can see that that is not a Christian ideal, right? Also, these regimes tend to say that lack a doctrine of total depravity. And all they're trying to say there is that means that they glorify the leaders as though their leaders get everything right? And what they need to do is have this air of being humble and saying, this is the way I think it should be, but maybe that's not right. Maybe somebody else has something else to say. Against Christian nationalism, they say that, one, these forms of government run by a branch of Christians, or we could really say any religion, tends to be intolerant of anyone who is not like them. And specifically with Christianity, so number two, there's so many branches. Who is to say that that the one who wants to be in charge is correct? So that's the problem that they have with Christian nationalism. They're also against liberal-based government, which they call civic totalism. They're against this because in civic totalism, they tend to enforce what they call the agenda of the day. For instance, they would say that today the agenda is pro-LGBTQ. And it's not because that's the right thing to do or we should accept all people, but it's because that's what's in vogue right now. But what I get is the main point of that concern is not that they're pushing that so much, but that anybody who disagrees with it is silenced. For instance, in civic totalism, we are pro-vaccine. But the problem is, this is what Wright and Bird would say, is the problem is that people who aren't are silenced, and they're not allowed to speak. They're made fun of. Honestly, this was a difficult chapter to get into, because there are issues that are in my mind. I mean, let's take it even to like slavery, to say that's obviously wrong. Like, there's no reason to discuss that. But I think what they're getting at here is that you always have to be willing to discuss, because once you're not willing to discuss, then you are part of that totalitarian regime again. So I think that was their main drive there. I think they could have done a much better job of it, and it is a more difficult conversation. But let's go on to chapter 7. Chapter 7 is like what they push for. So in chapter 6 we got all the things they didn't like, but in chapter 7 we get what they push for, and they push for what they call a liberal democracy. This type of approach is liberal in the way that it values individual liberties as much as it can, until those individual liberties intrude on others, and it's democratic in that they rely on all people. So the strength of the liberal democracy, as far as they can see, is that it values all opinions and all individuals and individual rights, and uphold and their right to uphold their own opinions. There are also many things in liberal democracy that safeguard against this autocracy. These types of governments push for universal suffrage and participation. They have a separation of powers. They promote dialogue. The government is transparent. They provide for economic freedom and opportunity. They place laws on everyone, even those in power, and they offer avenues for self-critique. Right, like this is in an ideal world, I'm assuming. The authors maintain that liberal democracy is one of the most notable achievements of human civilization, and they say that it could not have been done without Christianity and Christian values. The biggest problem with liberal democracies, according to Wright and Bird, is that because there is such great diversity in the people, there's also a great diversity in opinions, and this can lead to conflict. So liberal democracies need to have ways for people to express their opinions and beliefs without conflict. Okay, so that pretty much concludes my summary of the book. In case you're interested, here's a few comments I'd like to make. For one thing, and this on the positive side, this is something that I often tell my congregation and other Christians is that in the situations where you might not know what the right decision is, but your decision should always be made through love, right? Like you're always looking, how can I help the most people? And I'll give you an example of that. When we talk about like building a wall on the border, not letting Mexican people cross the border to the United States. So you can look at that and say, well, we need to help as many people as possible. We need to let as many people in as possible, especially if they're fleeing from an oppressive regime. If they can find a better life here, we need to do that as Christians. We need to love people and do that. And another way to look at that is you could say, no, we need to build a wall. And of course, I know a lot of people who would say that, and they'd say, well, that's because we need to keep them out. Well, no, that's not why, right? Your decision should be made out of love. So if you want to say anything, you can say, well, that's because when we let more people in, the economy tends to go down, and now the United States doesn't have as much power to help other people, right? Now, I realize that's something that you can argue with that all you want to. You can argue with either one of those. But what I'm getting at is that at least you're thinking through, what are the most loving things that I can do? How can I love these people or all the people in the world the most? Another way you can look at that is just simply by giving, right? So your church, if you're a member of the church and your church has $1,000 in mission, well, you could just give out that $1,000 right away. You could go give it to somebody on the street, right? And I'm not saying that's terrible. You could do that. But you could also give it to different charities, and you can stretch that out even further. And I'm not saying that's terrible either, like you can do that. Another thing is that you might put that money in your general budget so you can keep the church going for longer. And I'm not saying that that's wrong either, as long as you're saying not just like, I need to keep the church going because our church has to be here. By God, my great-grandparents established this church. But that you're saying that for, I think this is the most loving thing to do because we're the only church in this neighborhood, and we open our shelter every night, and we have a food pantry or something, and the longer that we can go, we can last as a church, the more help we can provide. So do you see what I'm saying? Is that one way or the other, your decisions are always gauged through, am I helping the most people? Am I being loving to the most people? And I think that's where this book is going. So for my negative, I feel like there's an obvious issue today that they're trying to deal with, but they never mention it directly. They do mention Christian nationalism, but they don't mention the attack on the Capitol on January 6th of 2021. And it's striking to me because they give a lot of examples in the book about things that happen around the world. And most of them happen somewhere other than America. Now, granted, neither of these authors are from America, but, well, not only are they going to get most of their money from book sales in America, but the book is obviously dealing with some of the problems that we're having in American politics. In fact, so much so that by not mentioning it, in my opinion, it's a glaring omission. Again, they mentioned fascism, but they never mentioned Donald Trump or those who want to put him in office, and those who think that Trump can't do anything wrong. Right? To me, that's a glaring omission, and they should address that. On the other hand, this could be great, since had they mentioned things like that, people who need to read this book the most would not read it. So maybe I shouldn't be so critical. Another problem I had was, like I was talking about with chapter 6, where they're talking about this civic totalism. Number one, they really did a lot with biblical passages and establishing things biblically, but they never really established that we shouldn't force human rights on others, right? I'm not saying that we should, but I'm saying that they never really dealt with that, this whole, we need to respect individual liberties. Well, what about the liberty to have slaves? Like, is that something that we need to respect, that we need to, hello, kind sir, wouldn't it be nice if you let your slaves go? Is that really something that we need dialogue about? I guess what I'm saying is, in the end, it's really a good read. It's obviously well informed, but I felt wanting in the end. Like they were about to get something accomplished, but they really stopped short of becoming a book that everybody should know about. All right, if you like this review, if you like this video, I don't know if I've said this before, but hit like. Until next time.